Hey there, welcome to saas.unbound podcast. I'm your host, I'm Nadeina, head of growth at SaaS Groups. Here we acquire buying wonderful SaaS businesses to take them to the next level. And here I chat with inspiring founders and experts to get an inside scoop on how they made their business success. So today with me is Alexis, founder and CEO of TheyGotAcquired, a media company that helps entrepreneurs sell their businesses. Welcome.
Hey, thanks. I'm excited to chat.
I'm super excited. It's not that often that I talk to another woman about acquisitions. Like it
Awesome.
literally almost never happens.
Let's do it.
Yes, and this is something that I also want to talk to you about like later in the episode, because this kind of like exit gap is a big thing, and yeah, I'll tell you more about this as well too, like what we do at SaaS Group. But let's start with your background. Like, how did you get into acquisitions in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not trained in M&A. I did not work in a corporate environment or in PE or anything. I started my career as a journalist and ended up running a couple of my own content businesses. And I went through the process of selling them twice. I felt like there weren't a lot of resources out there for people like me who weren't selling like a $200 million business. They got acquired. We focus on 6, 7, and low 8-figure sales, and kind of filling the pain point or filling the gap of solving my own pain point. Because when I went through it, I didn't know how to figure out what I was doing. And it's the same for most founders. When you sell for the first time, there's a huge learning curve, and there's not a lot of places to get information about this stuff. So that's what we aim to do.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's kind of our sweet spot as well. And you just released your new report about the acquisitions, and one of our brands was featured there as well. And I totally understand what you're saying. Like there's so much buzz about big acquisitions. I don't think there is a lot more information on how they go, but I think once you get to, like, I don't know, an acquisition that is 200 million or a billion or whatever, it's just so many people are involved, so many like lawyers and brokers and whatnot, that you don't really need to know. But when it comes to like lower valuations and lower multiples, and like you say, like maybe mid 7 figures, you want to know, because a lot of companies, that a lot of founders that sell to us, they want to be involved and they want to still like be in the process. So I think you're absolutely right. So how did you start? Did you start with like, kind of going over your own experience? And tell me more about your experience. Like, was it an enjoyable in a way process, or were you like, oh good God, like this is miserable?
Yeah, both of my experiences were pretty good. There were some sticking points, like there probably are for everybody at certain places, but generally overall it was a really good experience. So the first time I sold a business, it was a small content marketing business. I launched this company in 2010. We ran blogs for other businesses. So this is when businesses were starting to think about, they wanted to have a blog, but most companies didn't have someone internal doing it. And in 2015, we sold to one of our clients, and it was an acqui-hire. So myself and my team, we went in-house with the buyer. And we were pretty lucky because we had worked with this client for more than a year and a half at that point. So I knew the founder really well, and I knew that we matched and aligned. And yeah, so that company was called The Penny Hoarder. It was a personal finance media brand. So we went in-house there. I was there for a number of years helping to build that company. I was a second employee there, and we scaled really quickly to 100 employees. So it was a great experience for me to do something that was honestly bigger than I probably would have done on my own. I got to learn a lot. It was a fun journey. That brand ended up selling in 2020 for $100 million. So it was a really great success story of a bootstrap founder who got there. So it was kind of fun to be part of that and learn along the way. And then when I left there, I had a side project that, I say side project loosely because I had started it when I ran the agency. But when I went at the Penny Hoarder, I had a demanding job. I was growing it. I had a lot of people that I was overseeing pretty quickly. And I also had 2 kids during that time, like 2 babies. And it was a lot. So the side project was really put to the side. I really didn't touch it for those years. But after I left the Penny Hoarder, I picked it up for a while. It was a website for writers, and kind of played around with that for maybe 9 months or so and kind of asked myself, do I want to grow this? And realized like I didn't. It felt like it was who I was kind of 10 years previously. And so I ended up selling that as well. So that was a different experience because it was an asset sale. And that was about a $500,000 sale. So it was, on the smaller end of even the stuff that we kind of cover now. But it was still a meaningful exit for my family. And I was glad that I kind of kept it all those years to be able to then sell it. So yeah, I've had those two different experiences and they were both different, though I would say the second time I did feel like, oh, I've been through this once. I sort of know what I'm doing. But even then, I didn't know how to find not just like information, but the people who could help me. And I hear this from founders now too. They're like, advisors are telling me I'm too small to sell or, they won't represent me because I'm too small. Really, that's just that particular professional does not support that size of business. But even for smaller businesses, we usually say, if you're over $300,000 in revenue, you can probably find, and you're profitable, you can probably find an advisor who would want to help you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like now we're doing these events all over Europe and we're now moving to North America. And yeah, a lot of founders ask like very, for me already very, very basic questions about acquisitions, but it turns out no one really thinks about it because they're just doing their job and they're building great products. So exiting and being acquired is nothing to be aware of until a certain point. So I like really understand the meaning of what you were doing, but how did you start? So was it kind of expressing like was it in a way a blog where you were talking about your experience and grew out of it, or how did it start?
Yeah, so my background's in running media companies. So I started this as a media company and we still are today. So I have a team of reporters that write about deals that have happened. And we have two different kinds of content. We do write some like how to and like advice posts or like explainer posts, like what do you expect from due diligence? What does it look like to get a strategic buyer? Stuff like that. But I'd say an even bigger part of what we do is sharing stories of how founders have sold. So we interview founders who have sold and write a story about how they grew the company and how they sold it, including like how they connected with their buyer. And we try to share metrics along the way too. But I'd say metrics are always helpful. But what's even more helpful is like the context of how those deals happened for most founders. So yeah, we just started by writing these stories. We started with a newsletter and yeah, just kept going from there. We launched about 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like it's very important to, well, at least, it's interesting for people to know like what metrics were important and like what multiples. But I absolutely agree. It's a lot more important to kind of unfold how it happened, like why seemingly similar businesses get sometimes very, very different valuations. So I think that's a great thing. But you're also a community, right? What is it? 20,000 people subscribe for
We
the
have a
newsletter.
newsletter. I don't
Yeah.
really, I don't really consider it a community because we don't I'm since my background's in media companies, like I have thought deeply about like what's a community versus what's an audience. I think of a community as a place where you're connecting the members to each other, and we don't really have a way for people to do that. So we more have an audience where like we speak to the audience, they speak back to us. I do a lot of one-on-one calls with founders who want to sell, just to like help them figure out what their first steps might be or the best approach for their type of business. And then we also do a lot of referrals. So if there's a founder who wants to sell and is in a position where they might want to work with an M&A advisor, we have like a matching service. So because we talked to a lot of founders who have sold, we've heard the good and the bad of different brokers and advisors in the space. And we can say, okay, if you want to sell a SaaS business, here are the advisors we suggest that sell that size of SaaS business. Because like one mistake I sometimes see founders make is they don't realize initially that they should have an advisor who has sold their type of business before. So like if you're selling a SaaS business, you don't really want to work with the person down the street who sold like the yoga studio in your neighborhood. You want someone who's experienced with that type of business. And so that's the kind of matching that we do.
All right. Yeah, that sounds great. But to the point of, okay, let's call it an audience. I was wondering, like, what are the requests? Like,
Mm.
with this gap of knowledge about acquisitions and exits and multiples and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, what are founders and what is the audience asking for? Like, where do they feel like they're lacking the most?
Mm-hmm. I'd say the big question is like, what has this looked like for other companies like mine? So, an advisor or investment banker might call those comps. They're similar. They're deals that were similar to the one that you're hoping to have. It's kind of like when you sell your house, you look at all the homes in your neighborhood and say, what are they all selling for? So that's why the report we put out that you mentioned, we just put out a new SaaS report, but we have reports for all different types of companies. So like e-commerce, agencies, you can download it and see, okay, the one we just put out was like, I think it was 14 SaaS companies that sold. So you can have a sense for, okay, here's what this looked like for other SaaS businesses. I'd say that's one of the biggest requests is like, hey, have you seen any other companies like the one I'm running that have sold? And what did it look like for them? And then, yeah, a lot of like basic, like you mentioned, kind of basic questions, because most founders, we all have our heads down, we're building a business and we're worried about making a great business, not worried about selling it. And so there is a steep learning curve just around logistics of how long might it take? What does the process look like? Should I hire an advisor or do it myself? Like, what, I have a buyer who's approached me. What do I do? So kind of answering all these questions that just as they come up, they're all things we can help with.
Yeah, great. And what about like, because you do all this research and you talk to founders, and I assume you talk to all these M&A experts that you're matching them with, do you see any trends right now? Like, again, everyone wants to kind of know, okay, is this the year to sell? Like, are the valuations going up, or like, do acquirers want something with AI? And everyone wants a growing company, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
wants to have an AI label on them. Like, are there any trends that you noticed?
I mean, everyone's hoping M&A is going to be better this year. And so far, the things I'm hearing are pointing in that direction. We're not a brokerage, so we don't actually sell the company. So I hear from founders like after they've sold or when they want to sell. So I don't have my finger on like, what's happening this month. What do the deals look like? The sale prices this month. But generally, like I am hearing that it's looking up for this year, and that's what kind of we're all hopeful for. SaaS, though, I mean, SaaS is always in demand. It's like almost, it is really the golden child. Like we cover SaaS, e-commerce agencies, and media companies. I'd say the top four that we end up covering. SaaS is just always in demand. It gets the best multiples, and while it does help to think about how can you time the market, I think the more important question is like, what's the best timing for you and the business? And by that, like, yeah, you mentioned most buyers want to buy a company that's growing, and growth rate will really affect the multiple that you get. So if there's two companies that are earning $1 million in revenue and a similar EBITDA, the one that's growing faster is going to get a much better outcome or much better multiple for the business. So it's a little bit counterintuitive for some founders because we think, oh, we want to ride this wave. Like if the business is going up, I'm going to stay on it forever, right? But you want to sell while you're on the up. You don't want to wait till it's starting to go down to sell. So yeah, those are the kinds of
Yeah.
things I think, that timing, and like also timing around like the founder's real personal energy. Like another kind of drum that I'm always beating is don't wait till you're burned out to sell, because if you're burnt out, you might not have the energy to go through the process, which really can be a marathon, the process of selling. You've got to keep up your business performance during that time, because the last thing that you want to happen is for the business to decline while you're in the process, which could affect how much you actually make for the business. And so just being in touch with your own energy as the owner of the business and knowing when it's time to sell. And in that way, like it's tricky because everyone says you want to be really emotionally ready before you sell, but I actually think sometimes you want to think about selling before you're ready. Because if you wait till you're totally ready, you might have missed some of those milestones in terms of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I was listening to a podcast of, I think it was Rory Sutherland, and he was talking about like the differences, like cultural differences, and what he said about like this American outlook on life. Like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of Americans think that life has a possibility of infinitely getting better. And the
Mm-hmm.
same goes to business. Like if it's growing, it's just
Mm-hmm.
going to infinitely grow. And it was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, that's so funny, because like this is what we often see. And you're absolutely right. A lot of founders think, oh my God, it's growing. And, I'm just gonna go with it, and I'm not gonna sell this year because next year is going to be, I don't know, 30% better, and then 30% better. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that doesn't often happen. So I can totally back you up. I think your personal reasons and kind of drawing that dream exit for yourself a little bit earlier than you're ready, I think that's the key to kind of a successful deal.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, for some founders, the dream life is to just have a cash flowing business and it doesn't have to
Mm.
grow. And that can be a huge success as well. But I think the difference is knowing like what are the levers that are going to affect how much you get paid if if you do choose to sell the business. And like in most cases, a business that's great for you to run is also a great business to sell. But there's some instances where like on the growth, for example, where like I might be happy if my business is flat and I'm still making a great salary, a great income every year. I don't need it to grow heavily. But if I want to sell, you don't want to see any drops at all. You want to see at least like on the incline.
Yeah, makes great sense. So, any like wild stories you've heard while you were working with founders? What is the kind of, I don't know, the most bizarre story of maybe valuation or an exit that never happened?
There's so many stories of exits that don't happen or that fall
Oh
through
yeah.
at the last minute. And I think that's one thing that everyone learns the first time they go through it is there's often a false start. There's often something that falls through. Don't count your eggs until they hatch or whatever, chickens until they hatch. What's expression? But people don't talk about that as publicly, which is tricky. Like you hear that a lot in one-on-one conversations. Sometimes we write that in stories. Like the founder will say, oh yeah, they had 3 kind of failed attempts before it actually worked. I can think of a couple of stories that were kind of crazy valuation wise. Most of them are SaaS businesses because they do get the highest multiples. They happened in the 2020 and 2021 or maybe early 2 period because that time during the pandemic and as we were starting to recover was when we were seeing really high valuations for a lot of different types of online businesses. A business that probably would have done really well even now if they did able to time the market in that way. It's very hard to do intentionally, but if they had, they might have gotten even better multiples for it then. So there's one, I have a note of a couple of these stories here I was looking at. There's one called Hidden Levers. We have a story for that on our site. And that was a SaaS. And actually they sold for low 9 figures, which is really outside of what we usually cover at They Got Acquired. It's bigger, but the reason why we covered it was because they had 8 million in ARR and about 4 million in EBITDA, and they sold for a 16x multiple. It wasn't that they were funded and a much bigger company and that's why they had a bigger exit. They were in the revenue size of most of the businesses that we cover, but they got such a high multiple, and it was a multiple of revenue, not EBITDA in this instance, that they did very, very well. And one of the things that they did too was they served, if I remember correctly, I think it was financial advisors. So it was a market that, had money they were willing to spend. They had their EBITDA was 50%. So it was all the metrics, and I think they were growing as well. So all of their metrics were pointing in the right direction, that they were able to get multiple buyers that were interested, which also is another great way to increase your sale price. And then walked away with a great outcome. So there's sometimes examples like that. There's another one I remember. I'm trying to remember the name of the company, but it was a guy who built a SaaS, and he was like, I think he was in quantum computing, and he built a SaaS and it was very lean, but ended up selling for a really high multiple as well because it was like this specific niche that was just very lucrative to a particular strategic buyer.
Okay. Yeah, I think I also remember a couple of stories. And to your point of just building a great company and being super profitable and not growing like crazy year over year, I interviewed Mike Perm here on the podcast, founder of Sidekick. And yeah, it's a nifty little tool for developers that are working on Ruby on Rails. He's alone. I think he has like one part-time employee or something, and the
Mm-hmm.
business is doing like 5-7 million dollars in ARR per
Mm-hmm.
year. And he's like, why would I sell? I love
Yeah.
this. I love what I'm doing. It's, I've got the community, I've got
Mm-hmm.
like everything's working. And yeah, maybe we're not like growing super crazy, but again, why would I need that? Like
Yeah,
everything's
definitely.
kind of good, right? I'm focusing on that,
I
but
Yeah,
yeah.
I love those stories. So personally, like my favorite stories are the ones where it's a really lean bootstrap company. We do cover some VC-backed businesses. We're not solely bootstrap coverage, but most I'd say of the stories we cover are their bootstrap founders. And when they have like lean companies and they do really well, I just love those stories because first of all, I think it's smart. They're basically lifestyle businesses. A lot of people are doing this so they can have a life that they want, and they own 100% of the business or like half of it if they have a co-founder. So when they sell, it all goes into their pocket. So I just feel like those are huge wins for those types of founders. And I love reading about the lean companies. We actually have a report about companies that sold that run only on contractors and don't have any employees, which I thought was like just a cool angle. And there's more and more companies that are doing that now.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I think the wildest story of like valuation I heard from a founder of a conference actually, and they sold it for over like 100x valuation. And it was like, what? Like that's absolutely crazy. And yeah, well, they sold to strategic acquirer as well. And as we know, they do tend to pay little, well, not a little in this case, but a lot more.
Mhm.
But still, it was such a crazy valuation. When I heard about it the first time, I was like, I,
Yeah, the media companies really have, it's really interesting to see strategic acquisitions with media companies because sometimes like, there might be a firm that buys the company for the audience because they know that like if they buy this audience or they buy this community or this event that people go to, they can sell their already existing product or whatever they offer into that audience. So for them, it can be worth so much more than it was actually worth to original founder. But yeah, and that's like I'm always interested in those stories since my background's in media. But there's certainly that opportunity for media companies, particularly.
yeah, absolutely. I can introduce you to a founder if you're interested. But yeah, that was my eye-opening story that like
Mhm.
this happens.
Yeah, that sounds like a great
But
story. I'd love an intro.
cool. All right, sure. But yeah, and since we're on valuations and how to get to the highest multiple, and this is obviously always an elephant in the room. I mean, lately I'm always very curious how it's been happening, but cultural alignment was a very big topic, and I love the part of your story where you were talking about your own acquisition and the fact that you knew who you were selling to and you knew that
Mhm.
you're aligned. And I think it's so important because you're going into like a long-term relationship. It's a long-term relationship. You like
Mhm.
right away you sign this. And yeah, I was wondering like what, like again, talking to the founders and kind of knowing what's going on, is there anything that you recommend in terms of what to choose? Like if there is a gap, say there are two companies, there are two acquirers fighting for you, and one is offering 15 million, but you don't know them, you've never established any relationship, they're kind of new, it's maybe their first acquisition, but they got the capital to deploy. Or it's maybe a client that you worked with and they got, let's say, 10 mil, but they're great people. You loved working with them. Like, what do you think? Is it like where to go? Where
Mhm.
should be the priority?
I mean, I think most of the founders that we speak with, they sell who they want to sell to. And I mean, this was my experience as well. For the second sale that I went through, I had multiple potential buyers and I did not sell to the highest bidder. It was the company I wanted the website to land. And I think that's the case for a lot of founders, is like at this level anyways, especially if you have a board and stakeholders and this and that, like investors, you might have to sell to the highest bidder. But if you are bootstrapped and you have full autonomy, you get to choose what are your values and what matters to you. And absolutely money should be part of that. And for most of it's probably the biggest part, but what else is part of that deal and what else matters to you as a founder, and thinking through that. The other thing is like the terms matter, right? Like somebody might be offering like what looks like the highest price as a top line number, but when you dig into the terms, like maybe a lot of it is in an earnout or it's performance based or whatever. Like thinking through the terms, I think is a lot more important than just like looking at the overall number and how much of that payout is at risk, because a lot of earnouts do not come to fruition. So you really can't count on that as an absolute definite. And the other piece I would say is like, if there is someone who you want to sell to, but their offer is not as financially lucrative as other buyers, is just getting creative with how you can make it worth your while. And like, I can give a couple examples of things we've seen people do. Like sometimes for smaller companies, like 6-figure companies, we see founders wanting to sell to an employee or like a friend or someone that they like their future vision for the business, but they don't have the money to buy it. And some of those folks use seller financing, which basically means that the buyer pays the seller out of proceeds from the business over time. It's really risky for the seller and it's not ideal because you don't get all that cash up front. But it does mean that it's like creates a way to hand the business to someone that you want to see take it over. And also there's like lots of intangibles you can ask for too. I mean, this is a small thing, but like when I sold my website, there was a couple of links on the website that linked to my new project that I was working on. And I did a lot of SEO around this site. And I sold it in 2021, I think. So this is before like SEO has become as unreliable as it is now. And, there was a page that was getting a lot of traffic from search that was sending people to my next project. And so I had written into the contract, like, you must keep these links in as part of the deal. And that was something that made a big difference for me. It didn't really matter to the buyer. They didn't care. So it wasn't like any skin off their back, but it was beneficial to me in the long run. So I think just like looking for other things, not being afraid to ask for, at least once you're far enough along that you're not worried about souring the relationship, asking for things that might matter to you that maybe isn't as big of a deal to the buyer.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's important to remember. But yeah, I want to come back to what I wanted to ask you at the very beginning, and it's this exit gap. And I started digging deeper into this because, well, to be honest, like to this day, 22 brands in saas group, we've never bought a company that was female led.
Oh my gosh, we got to change that.
I know, right? And it's not even like, I think the worst kind of thing to say in this case. The worst thing is that I think last year, over like 1,000 talks that we had with founders, I don't know, I would say that maybe 1% was female led or had a female in the founding team, which is just, well, sad. And I mean, we cannot do anything about the fact that it's very male dominated industry. And just overall, I think that the number of female led companies are like, what, 13% or something. And the most recent kind of statistics on female led companies being sold is that 1.3 or something like that. So that's obviously ridiculously low. And we decided that, we're going to take an initiative and kind of consciously take steps into finding those companies and into, obviously it's still business, right? And we're going to buy the best company out there. But we want to create like a more inclusive environment for female founders as well to come and talk to us. And we've got like female CEOs that are happy to talk and kind of walk them through the process. But yeah, I'm wondering like if it's kind of the same for everybody, or are we missing a point somewhere? Like, what do you see? Yeah, what's going on out there? Are there more female founders? Like, what are we missing?
I mean, it's definitely hard, and especially in SaaS. So we have made an effort from the beginning to make sure that we're covering around half of the sales are women who sold their business. And I care about that because I'm a woman, and like, I want to lift up all founders, but a big part of my personal ethos is like, I want to see women make more money so we can make more decisions in the world. So whenever I have an opportunity to do that, and I think like giving visibility to women who have done these things is part of that, because on a lot of podcasts, we hear the same people over and over telling their stories, and many of them have great stories, but there's lots of people out there who have never been featured anywhere, which is the type of person that we typically try to cover. But I will say in SaaS, it's hard. Like there are fewer female SaaS founders for sure. But I think it's just about making the effort, making the extra effort. And some of that is like, yeah, having a woman on the podcast that shows that like you care about this thing, or like even for me leading basically an M&A brand where there just aren't that many women in M&A, is like a lot of the free calls that I do with founders are with women. And I think it's just nice to have the option of maybe for some people, it makes them feel like more comfortable asking certain questions, especially because the way I talk about this stuff is it's very founder oriented. Like I don't have a finance background, so I'm going to be using the same words that you're using to talk about this stuff. I think just having that accessible nature, I would just make an effort to try to go to where the female founders are, if that's a goal of yours for the year. I mean, I remember this when in hiring for other brands I've worked at, it's tricky. It's really hard to talk about, especially right now with the environment in the US, where this is a very sensitive topic, and it's going to get worse for women before it gets better. So I feel like we all have to do our part to lift people up wherever we can, even when, there's a lot of people who are chirping about how we shouldn't be doing it. Keep on keeping on. But yeah, I would just say, like, where can you go that women founders are hanging out, and get in front of those people? And like some of the groups for founders, they have like a channel in Slack that's like for female founders. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share some of those ideas with you if you want after the call, but I would just try to get in front of those people, because there are certainly fewer, but I think it's still doable but it takes extra effort, right? And also it's a networking thing. Like if you have all male founders who you've purchased from, like a lot of their friends and their networks are all going to be male, and they're going to refer those people to you, which is great. But once you start getting a few women in the door, then they're going to refer to their female, like everyone refers to everybody, like supposedly, but like I have a lot more female friends than probably some of the founders that, you've bought. Yeah. So once you have those people in the door, then they're going to refer more. So it's really a snowball effect, and it just does take a little extra effort at the beginning.
Right, absolutely. And probably women are going to refer the hell out of it. So, I 100% agree. And it is, I love that it's now a conscious effort to do that.
You're not in the US, so here it's a conscious effort not to do it.
Okay. So it's oh, good God. Okay.
Totally different atmosphere now, yeah.
All right. I'm kind of worried now too, because we're planning to go to saas.us in Austin in May. And there is a bit of a battle in my head, to be honest. Like, do I want to go? Do I want, like, I do. Honestly, I want to, in a way, I want to go on stage as a woman talking about M&A, because, hey, there are very, very few. And but it's just going to the US bit that kind of bothers me a little bit.
Well, I think you'll be okay at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
I would say definitely do it for sure. I bet you'll meet some great people there, and they'll see a woman talking about this stuff, and that does make a difference.
Yeah, pretty sure. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for your, for sharing your opinion. We had Diamond, the CEO of Software Equity Group, here on the podcast as well. And yeah, I don't think we asked her about this exit gap, but again, just having a woman, it was so, when we talk to other acquirers or brokers or anyone in M&A, it's usually a man. So having a woman talk about that was really like a very refreshing kind of situation. But yeah, I wanted to also kind of go back to your own acquisitions and maybe talk about the way you reflect on it and maybe use it as inspiration for what you're writing about and how you're working with founders? Because I think this like preparation for an exit and just kind of, the emotional state of going through this,
Mm-hmm.
it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you, how did you prepare for it mentally? Because again, I was talking to, well, all founders who sold to saas group. It's so very different. And some of them were like, you know what, I was ready. And by the time I signed the documents, I knew that, yes, I'm staying, but it's not my company. I'm totally fine with it. And if tomorrow you decide that, okay, you got the money and we're shutting it down, I'm supposed to be okay with that. But some really value the fact that we promise, kind of, to continue what they were doing. And in 5 years, they will type their website into Google and will still be there. So how did you prepare for an exit? Kind of did this shift mentally
Mm-hmm.
out of the founder mode?
I mean, I didn't know. This was before I studied M&A, so like I was coming to this totally blind, and I think I'd do it differently if I did it all over again now. Because what I tell people now is like, no matter how much you like the buyer and are aligned with them and are happy with the deal, they're never going to run the company the same way that you did. Like they're always going to do something different. And I think a lot of people end up being blindsided by that, even though, of course, it makes sense. But for me, my first sale, I had to transition from, because I had spent some of my career as a journalist, and then I ran my own business for 5 years. And then when I sold, I became an employee again because it was an acqui-hire. And so I had to go through this like transition in my brain where I thought I would never become an employee again because I just loved running my own business and I just did not see it in my future. And so I had to kind of reconcile that. At the same time, I wasn't forced into it. I wanted to do it because it was a great opportunity and all the stars kind of aligned. And there was a lot of reasons why I wanted to do it. They all pretty much panned out like how I was hoping. So it was a good shift for me. And I think what helped was like it's so personal, right, to everyone's experience. But in that experience, like I went into another bootstrapped startup where I was a second employee and I had a lot of autonomy and, a leadership role, and I got to help build the culture of the company. So I was still using a lot of those muscles, even though the company was not mine anymore. But certainly there was like times where I didn't always see eye to eye with the founder and we had to work through that. And like he had the final say because it's his company now, right? So I do think there is a bit of like having to get over like this was my baby and it's not my baby anymore, and just like mentally preparing for that. And I mean, similar experience for the second sale I went through. That one, the sale was actually a really smooth, like I had a bunch of buyers that wanted the business. Most of them were competitors that had approached me about it. So I was able to kind of create this bidding war. The company wasn't really even making that much money, but I sold it for a decent amount. And I didn't know anything about multiples back then. And I never even calculated what the multiple would be because it was kind of irrelevant. But after I sold it, the buyer resold it 2 months later to somebody else. And I did not expect that. And, I was just barely transitioning out of running it myself. So that was a really hard pill to swallow, that like this buyer that I had chosen so carefully and thought would do certain things that obviously they had said they would do with the site, they did not do that. And so that was like a real good lesson of like, yeah, this isn't yours anymore and it's gone. And it definitely hurt and it sucked at first. It really did. But then I kind of came around to it. I was like, you know what? I got what I needed out of this. Like I loved running it while I ran it and my family benefited financially from it. And, it's time. I want to move on anyways. So yeah, I think just like it is kind of an emotional coming to terms with certain things. But for me, both times it ended up fine, even though I had that one tough part. In the end, I was like glad to be moving on.
Yeah. I remember talking to Emil, a founder of Jitsi, about them selling to Atlassian.
Mm-hmm.
And it just stuck with me what he said about this experience. He was like, yeah, I knew what we were getting into, and it wasn't a surprise. Both parties wanted it, and, it was a great financial outcome as well. but still it was such a clash. It was so new. It was like you could not even prepare for it. And it was again a strategic acquisition. So they were bootstrapped, super small, like 8 people joining Atlassian, which was huge even back then. So yeah, I think it's obviously very important to kind of just come to peace with the fact that you are selling and it's not your baby. But yeah, I don't know if it's totally possible to kind of detach yourself and be like, okay, completely cool about
I think
whatever
it depends
happens.
too, as whether you're expected to stay on or not.
Yeah.
Because like with my first experience, I stayed there for 4 or 5 more years afterwards, and I was happy. And my second one, there was none of that because it was an asset transfer, and I had documented everything really well. So I basically just like passed it on and pieced out. So I think it depends on whether you're expected to stay. But we do hear from a lot of founders, and like again, no one broadcasts this, but when we cover sales, we'll see, oh, this person shared that they had an earnout as part of this, and you see, oh, they left 6 months later and they didn't finish it out. So like there definitely are instances where the founder's like, I just can't do this, or it's not the right fit, and I'm going to cut my losses now and take what I can from it, knowing that I'm not getting like the full earnout because I just mentally want to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I heard those stories too. And it's just, yeah, you obviously want to prepare, and you want to ensure that it's cultural alignment, and people that you can talk to and maybe even enjoy doing that. But at the end of the day, like working together can be a bit tough. All right, so what if you had one advice to give to founders, especially SaaS founders selling their company? Like, what would be the ultimate piece?
I'd say just build a great business, because if you build a business that you want to run, it's likely that someone else is going to want it too. And when you think about it that way, it's really foundational. There's no magic. It's like build a great business that is run smoothly, has a good team in place, is not reliant on you, makes good money, and not just good revenue, but good profit. And if you do all those things, which are really all foundational, and they're simple, they're not easy, they're simple, they can still be really hard. But if you can do all those things, then you will probably have buyers lining up, especially if you're running a SaaS.
Yeah, that's a great one. Even though it does sound like it's common sense, but yeah, I think that's really the foundation we have to start with. Okay, I have a couple more questions that are the usuals here, and this will be about your experience building They Got Acquired and getting it to 20,000 people. So, what has been the biggest win and the biggest failure with it?
I'd say the biggest win has been the content market fit, in that people really wanted this information, and I had hoped they would, because that was me in those shoes at one point. But yeah, I love hearing from people all the time who are like, this really helped me, or thank you for doing what you do, because there's not a lot of places to get this information from. So I'd say that's the biggest win, is like seeing that fit, and also seeing the founders that have benefited from it. And I hear from founders who are like, I took your course, and we have a very short, like it's a 1 hour course on how to sell your business. It's not even like a cohort or big deal, but they're like, I took your course and I didn't even know that they were looking to sell. I never talked to them. And then I sold, and just hearing about that is just cool. Or like seeing people that we matched to advisors actually go through the sale process and see it come out on the other side. That always feels really good. Hardest part, I'd say the hardest part, it's definitely taken longer to figure out this business than I feel like it should have, given I've run a number of other businesses before. Like I feel like I've done this before, and we're 3 years in. I still feel like we're figuring out like the monetization of the business, and it's been tricky. It's definitely it's a different time for media companies generally. Like a lot of the things that worked years ago don't work anymore. So you have to figure out new solutions. So I think that's been the hardest part for me personally.
Okay. Yeah, I can totally understand. And yeah, the last one is about hack. And yeah, maybe about the way you actually grew it to 20,000 people. Like how to get 20,000 people interested in, this topic, which is, Well, I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen for all 20,000, but like how to get people engaged and how to drive them to,
Yeah.
to you.
Our newsletter list is like half that size. I wasn't going to correct you the first time, but I felt since you said it a few times, I feel like I should say. But
Where did I get that? Okay.
it's
I need
okay.
to check my
I don't
sources.
mind. We're going to be there. We're going to be there.
Yes,
Maybe it's
yes,
like something
definitely.
combined, but if you look at our newsletter, it's about half that. A hack. I mean, I am loving LinkedIn lately. Like, I actually enjoy writing there, and I mean, I have blogged on the internet for like a long time, so I think it's basically using those same muscles and just putting it on LinkedIn instead of on a website. But I have found that to be incredibly helpful for bringing people to our newsletter list, bringing in founders who want to sell and want to learn with us, and just also just connecting with interesting people. So, I mean, for me, I know it doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone likes to write, and some people really cringe at the thought of being on a networking platform like that. But I think if you can do it in a way that's fun for you, it can really be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with LinkedIn, it comes in waves. Like, I remember when I first got to LinkedIn, I don't know, like 10 years ago or something, it was something ridiculous. It was just only salespeople, and you did not want to be there. Then I came back like 3, 4 years ago, and I was like, oh, that's actually super cool. Like, people actually want to bring some value and share some good stuff. And now it's again like, oh, but everything is AI and nothing is true. And they're, salespeople and AI SDRs. So I don't know. It
Yeah,
comes and
that
goes
part
with,
is
with
definitely
LinkedIn.
tricky
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Any automation that you're using or all manual?
No, I mostly do it manually for LinkedIn.
Okay.
I feel like and it's the only platform that I'm personally writing on. So it's not like I could, if I was writing somewhere else, maybe there's an automation where I could repurpose it for there, but that's where I write
Yeah.
now. I do reuse some of the stuff in our newsletter because our newsletter is from our brand They Got Acquired, but sometimes I'll write a section that's like
Mm.
behind the business and sharing how I'm growing the business. So I reuse some of the stuff in there. And I do sometimes, I say no automations, but I do sometimes use Claude to say like, okay, I've written this before. Can you do a different variation? Like for a post that did really
Yeah.
well. But I don't like post it right as it suggests. Like I typically edit it and give it my own touch. So definitely it's AI supported, I'd say. But
Yeah.
most of it is me.
AI supported. Okay, I'm going to steal that term. My content is AI supported. Love this. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything. I think it's great that you have access to such a broad pool of founders that are selling. It's really fascinating. Like I've been a subscriber for so long. I mean, I've been looking forward to this episode for at least a year, and I've been
Awesome. Well,
subscribed for
I'm glad we
longer.
finally connected in person.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, thanks for sharing the good stuff, and thanks for featuring us and our
Yeah.
brands. So yeah, happy to do it again sometime.
Awesome. Yeah. It's nice to chat with you. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Anytime, Alexis, and take care.